When we think about what we can learn when we read an article, it's helpful to remember the difference between primary and secondary information. Both types of information are important, but we're going to focus on the type of information we will need in writing an APA-style lit review, primary information. In many cases, the primary source is the results of studies, so we need to understand the research methods and results to accurately explain what we know. Given that, I thought it might be helpful to highlight the two things that seem to create confusion and result in students using inaccurate information. One thing that creates confusion is that articles are a combination of primary and secondary sources. The introduction section is primarily a secondary source, and parts of the discussion might be too. Another thing that leads to confusion is that it's complicated to use primary source information since we not only have to understand the design and the findings, but also how to write about them accurately. Let's think a little bit more about the introduction section being a primary source. If we were to read all of the introduction to the Burton and King article, we would see the information in this slide about Fredrickson's model, which can be related to stress in a few ways. The citations and references to Fredrickson signal that the information is from another source, though, so it's been interpreted from that source, which means that using it in our introduction would be using an interpretation of an interpretation. The examples at the bottom of this slide represent the three most common ways I tend to see students using secondary information from the introduction in their lit review. The first gives the impression that Burton and King had the idea, but it was from Fredrickson. The second gives the impression that even though it's in quotes. The third does give Fredrickson credit, but APA style does not cite this way. If we want to use an idea from the intro, we need to read the primary source. Since the introduction section includes a great deal of secondary information, you'll want to avoid quoting or paraphrasing from that section right now. There are two main reasons I'm making that recommendation. The first one relates to the goals of this class. We're learning about research methods, so we want to focus on the part of the article that relates to those concepts, the method and the results. Those help us understand the primary source information. When you're learning about research methods and the ideas in an article, the introduction section can also be confusing. So when we emphasize the method and the results, we can reduce frustration. My experience has been that confusion and frustration is a common reason students accidentally plagiarize by copying from the articles. To write about that information accurately, we need to make sure the sentence structure gives the correct impression about the variables included in the study. For example, we know Burton and King manipulated writing, measured mood and health center visits, and found that writing about positive experiences was associated with enhanced positive mood and better health. The statements at the bottom of the slide do not accurately represent those variables and results. The first example is written as a statement of fact that gives the impression that the Burton study measured stress, but it didn't. The second example has the same issue. Remember, though, that we can use reasoning and logic to apply ideas from articles. We just need to structure the sentences differently. The example in this slide is accurate because the phrase may be indicates this is an idea we had. The second example is accurate because it simply paraphrases the findings. The goal in APA-style writing, though, is to have more of the intro like the first example in this slide. We'll learn about the different citation formats too, but for now I want to focus on the content of the writing. Accurately using primary source information from articles is easier if we think about the content of each section of the manuscript and apply what we know about research methods. That helps us focus on our notes about the method and the result, rather than going back to look at the article and starting with the introduction section. Thinking about the information and what we know about research methods helps us use the right wording, especially if we make a habit of avoiding the words causes, effects, and proofs.